How many people do we know that are creatives that have side hustles? Like everybody? Yeah, so that's not at all exception here as well. One of the things when we're talking about a program that we thought would be helpful is understanding how you can make money and have the money work for you as an artist. We know that it's really hard to get started, and you have limited resources, but these two folks are successful business people and are here to give you some tips about that. There's a handout that's been prepared that gives you some resources as well. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Johanna and let her get on the program.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Can you all hear me? Okay. Yeah, so following up on what Becky said, I just wanted to give a short little intro. We, myself and Pablo and so many other artists have found it really helpful to have a couple people that are close in our circles to talk to about money and finances. And the reason why we thought this would be a great time to talk to a little bit larger audience was just because sometimes that part of being an artist is something that we can't really address or talk about freely, it seems like, unless you're with someone who really cares about you, like your mother or father or husband or wife or kid or whatever. So one of the things that I've been my mission when I talk to other artists, especially when it comes to money, is that when you talk about money freely, you're actually breaking down those barriers between generational wealth. So even if a lot of this information is something that you already know today, really think about that. If you already know this, there is someone out there who doesn't, and if you find that person, open up to them. So we had to kind of pick a starting place with where to start with talking about money. So we thought we'll tell you our origin stories, kind of like podcast style, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty money advice. But there's also this really nice handout that has some of the advice on it that we're going to be talking about. So if you have a chance to look that over, there are some gems on there. If there's anything that you have questions about, feel free to ask myself or Pablo, or again, any of your, hopefully you build that community around you of folks that you can really dig into about finances and money and how to deal with it. Because as an entrepreneur, solopreneur, artist, we just need that. So hopefully you will all enjoy this. So we're going to start off with a little origin story. I'm going to pass the mic to Pablo because he does have a side hustle that he's had since he was like 5 years old. So this is one of the best stories that I heard all of last week. So I really hope you guys enjoy this. So Pablo.
Awesome. Hey everyone, Pablo Guzman here. So this is kind of an interesting one for sure. First off, thank you all for coming and joining us tonight. I think finances in the creative space especially is really important to talk about. And also there's a lot of different ways to find success. I think mine is one of the more unique stories. So for me, I think there's two different types of entrepreneurs. You have people who have entrepreneurial tendencies, and you have like an actual entrepreneur, which I think is kind of where I fell into. So my story starts back in 3rd grade. I had some friends that were making bead keychains. So I know that's still kind of a fun hustle for children or even adults to make these beaded things to sell. And so I started doing this in 3rd grade when I saw some classmates that made a shoddy example of it. So I geeked out enough to where I actually made a spreadsheet, and I had like beaded leopard geckos, beaded dragons, beaded turtles. You can change the eye color, and I made this entire thing where I walked door to door hand selling beaded keychains over time.
What grade were you in?
This was 3rd grade. So this kind of progressed. So I also have a lot of plants and animals. I have a reptile store, which I'll get to. So a couple of years later, I bought a leopard gecko, and then I bought another leopard gecko. Turns out they were boy and girl. And now I had leopard gecko eggs. So luckily, my mom, who's sitting back there, was nice enough to let me have them in the house. And I ended up hatching and breeding leopard geckos as an elementary and middle school student at my house. And then I would sell these animals, these geckos, to my teachers, who also have a teacher in the audience. And I would order boxes of thousands of crickets to my mom's house. And I would take orders at the end of school for my classmates and teachers, where I would get, I'd ask them how many they need. They'd say 2 or 3 dozen crickets, and And the next morning I would bag them up and I would take them in my backpack and give them to my teachers and classmates. So that, thanks Mom. So very much from a young age I was always kind of doing the side hustle thing, not really knowing it was a side hustle, it was just kind of trying to figure out how to monetize what I do naturally. So this kind of kept on throughout middle school and high school. In high school I learned how to design websites, so then I started designing websites for different businesses in Greeley, at the same time scaling up the Gecko and Breeder Dragon breeding facility. That was my closet. And this just kind of continued on. So as far as things that relate to the creative aspect, we would do a lot of traveling with schools. My parents are both from Mexico, so we also go back to Mexico every other year or so, and I just kind of got that travel bug in me. And I started taking pictures and writing about it. So kind of scaling up at the same time, I figured I'd start a blog called hobbyists.com and take pictures of where I was traveling, and eventually this turned into its own thing where I would essentially have sponsored posts, which I think is kind of the most relevant thing today as far as us using social media and platforms, trying to find different businesses to sponsor your art or your thing or whatever it is that you do best. And this is kind of, yeah, I guess scaled up. So eventually, and this is, let's see. All right, I know where to go now. There's a lot of weird things that I do. So what I ended up realizing was a lot of people make the mistake of either taking out a lot of money or loans to kind of pursue the passion. And if you're not able to be successful enough to kind of pay back that investment, you end up digging yourself in a hole. One of the things I've been able to do really well is scale up my side hustles to where it allows me to pursue my creativity without having that stress. So the blog, for example, hobbyists.com, once I monetized that, once I had someone pay me $30, I realized that covered my hosting for a full year. And that was kind of my first initial, okay, I'm kind of able to pay myself to allow myself to be creative. So this eventually scaled up to, okay, now sponsored blog posts. And what I figured out was, how much money do I need to be able to pay for the blog, to pay for a flight, to pay for 3 months of this, to pay for, and it just kind of allowed me to scale up over and over and over again. So it's not a pretty thing by any means, but eventually I had, honestly it was like $500. So $500 allowed me and my business partner at the reptile store to buy, it was like 5 aquariums and lids and 20 mice. And this kind of sounds a little weird, but there was a warehouse in Colorado that used to breed mice for reptile breeders, or sorry, snake breeders in particular. And my business partner and I saved $500 to buy this base setup, which will allow us to then create recurring revenue by breeding mice and rats for people who have pet snakes. This eventually scaled up over a year and a half. So we went from my laundry room to my garage to eventually kind of the same pattern, saving up $700 to get our first retail space. So again, we didn't take out any loans, we didn't get any money or support from anyone. It was just pure, dedicated saving and investing and making sure that we don't go out and splurge on drinks for the weekend, making sure that we don't go buy a new phone. So it was a lot of just working with what we had. So I think we talked kind of the same way. It's not exactly the level of camera you have, more of the knowledge of the camera body itself. So we saved $700, we rented out the 1 unit, and for a solid 3 years we did not pay ourselves. So I know there's kind of one of the first topics that says pay yourself first on a sheet. So we did that in the sense of we had our main hustles where we paid ourselves first to live, and our side hustles which paid itself to reinvest in itself. I think that's kind of pretty important. That's also been very helpful. If you get into the typical business loan mindset, you have a loan for 3 years. And at the end of those 3 years, if you're not scaled up enough to pay yourself, then your business kind of ends there, where you have to figure something else out. And that is one route to take. We kind of took this other route, which teach their own, but you do have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself first, absolutely. But if you can be strategic about it, make sure to set aside that set amount per month or per quarter to continue growing whatever it is you're doing. So for us, that was $700 for the 1 rental space, and then it was not paying ourselves for 3 years. But what I can tell you is in 3 years, we went from 1 retail space to 2 to 3, to now we have 4 units. And in the same way that we created this bookstore, the reptile store became my bread and butter, and the bookstore became my side hustle. So all the money the bookstore was making went into buying books, went into buying shelves, went into decorating, kind of adding and creating this cool space and environment. So, and I think that's just, a lot of the growth is realizing how do you subdivide these categories, how do you figure out how to maintain, and then also grow your side hustle to continue, developing into something. There's a lot of other stories, but I think I'll switch it over now to Johanna.
Yeah, that was really good though. I was not the kid that was allowed to have any pets, unfortunately, so that never happened to me. But I also started being an entrepreneur at a really young age when most kids were like selling lemonade. I started painting rocks and had my little stand outside of my house, and I walked dogs for quarters and did as many other things as I could because my parents instilled this work ethic in us that was, if you want it, go earn the money to go get it. And that in and of itself was an extraordinary gift, which at the time I totally stuck my nose at that and was like, why can't you just buy it for me? And now I'm reaping the rewards of that. So I went from sort of painting things that were around the house. I painted like recycled cans and glass bottles, anything that was free, because I was sort of experimenting with that, buying at cost, right? And then you're upping it, so you get that maximum amount of money. So even as a kid, I somehow knew, like, well, if I paid $0 for this glass bottle that I took out of the recycle, now I can paint it, and then I sold it. My parents got us bank accounts for all of these quarters as they started adding up. At this bank in Denver called the Young Entrepreneurs Bank. And again, like, getting your kid a bank account, that is a huge step that if you haven't done that yet, great. If you are going to have a kid, it's a good thing to do, right? Because it taught me about money at a really young age. And my parents were both teachers, so they worked really, really hard for their money just to send us to good schools, but we did nothing else. Like, when the vacation was to go see family, like, that was it, right? So I started gathering all these things that I was painting, really very detailed like, and I went and did this Young Entrepreneurs Fair at the bank. And it was basically my first art festival at like age 10. And I came home with like, I don't even know, 25, 50 bucks. And I was sold. I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And it really stuck. And I loved the business part of it. I loved making something that I was proud of, and then having people see value in it. That was really important to me. And it still is. So from there, I started making art, and I loved art, but everyone said, well, you're never going to make a living at it. So I said, I'll be a graphic designer. And then I took one printmaking class in college at the Metropolitan State College of Denver, and I had the most excellent mentor who pushed that line between I'm going to challenge you and I'm going to compliment you just enough so that you'll still want to make work. And it was incredible. It changed me. It changed what I wanted to do in life. So I went from being on the graphic design track, switching over to art, and then finding this incredible community within the art world and printmakers in general. If you don't know anything about printmaking, you can come visit the studio, because printmakers are really great people. And anyways, I started making prints, started making art, and then getting, again, that rush when my work was accepted into a show. And then that bar got raised to, oh, I got in the show, now I want to sell at least one piece. And then I get into the show, sell one piece. Ooh, that was great. Now let's sell 2 pieces. And then on and on and on until I'm like, oh, really want to, hit 6 figures, right? Or whatever the new goal is. There's always a goal on the horizon. So anyways, that was sort of my foray. And then throughout my adult life, I also paid very close attention to money. I was gifted a book by a friend, Susie Orman. I don't know, she used to be on PBS. And she had this deal. If you bought her book, you got $100 if you did a direct deposit over the course of a year. You got $100 for free. And the closest thing to gold was like, free money. So I $50 in during my last year of college, and I had an ex-boyfriend who was a banker, and he was like, I'm giving a Roth IRA, and I was like, what the hell is a Roth IRA? and he told me, and I was like, okay, great, but I can't afford to do that. And he's like, yes, you can. You put $50 in a month. So of my whatever menial salary I was getting at minimum wage working retail, I was able to put $100 somehow into the Susie Orman account, and I started an IRA when I was 21 years old. And nobody told me to do it other than the boyfriend who was like, it'd be a good idea, but I won't do it for you. So it's a reason why I'm not with him. And then, so anyways, I had this money, and it was that pay yourself first, where I treated it like a bill. Every month I got paid, and then that $50 got taken away, just like a utility payment, like gas in your car, whatever it was. Little did I know, because I wasn't looking at this account, it wasn't, you know, something that I was doing actively at the time. But when I looked at it after a couple months, 6 months, a year, I was like, oh, it added up. So it adds up. And one of the best things that anyone will tell you, and I've heard this from a lot of people who are not, they don't have a lot of privilege, is start somewhere. Whether that $50 is $5 or $20, just put whatever you can afford to towards yourself for later, and it will add up. And that ended up being a nest egg for greater things. And then being able to leverage where that nest egg was at the time. You can do a lot if you have a full-time job. But as a creative entrepreneurial person who has never been able to hold a full-time job for more than like a year and a half, because I just am miserable and all I want to do is work for myself, I made those times work for me. That was when I applied for a loan to get a house or a car or whatever I needed at the time. So sometimes doing a little bit of that, you know, people ask like, when do you quit your day job? And it's like, well, how set up are you? Do you need insurance? Do you need these other things? Because sometimes a full-time job can be really worth it. So anyways, that was sort of where I landed, and then my husband and I came to Greeley about 7 years ago from Fort Collins, and we came here for the real estate because it was what we could afford. So we bought the warehouse that is now Wonderhand Studios. And I still make art and sell it and show out of my studio and at galleries and all of that. So that is me. But basically, that's how I feel about self-employment, is that I need it in my blood to survive. But it is really hard. So what do you think the hardest thing about being self-employed is?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of different things that I guess are difficult about it. It's kind of similar to you though. It's one of those things where I'm more happy being self-employed and kind of grinding every day as opposed to working 40 hours for anybody else. So it's not the prettiest endeavor by any means, but I do think it allows me to be more happy than any other situation. And also kind of want to tag on too. So I wasn't 21, I think that's when I started. I did, however, though, in the process of kind of growing and talking to other friends, entrepreneurial friends, creative friends, kind of did the same thing where I started investing. Mine was $5 a week. So, and it's kind of, I've never been doing that for 6 years, and I highly recommend it. Actually, I had Joe over here to start a few months ago. To all my employees, one of the first conversations I have with them is, hey, I can't tell you what to do, but I highly recommend you do start investing, even if it's just $5 here or $10 a month or whatever it is, because I think that's been super impactful, especially for myself. One of the things that I think is most difficult, though, about being self-employed is there's this kind of perception that, you know, you see these people, these businesses, and you're like, oh, they made it, they're doing really well. They must, you know, they must have tons of time, and it's quite the opposite. It's quite the opposite. You have very little time. It is very much kind of a love of the craft of what you do, and I think what people forget is that we're all much more similar than you imagine. You know, and having conversations like this kind of allows you to realize, like, we're not that different, we're not that far apart, it's just how we're going about things. So,
yeah, I once did a visiting artist thing with a bunch of students, and they were like, oh, being self-employed must be great, you must get up at like noon. Never have I gotten up at noon. But I think that's funny because once, you bridge that to self-employment, your days are packed, your weekends are packed, you become sort of on all the time. And it is something else to endure that. A lot of people like the 9 to 5 where they can shut off at 5 and not have to worry about things. But when you're self-employed, it's on you. You didn't finish whatever you needed to that day in the studio. Me. But it is something that, in terms of the that switch between full-time and not, like I have really good artist friends who may not ever be able to, quote, be an artist full-time because they really need health insurance, or they have family or whatever, who needs health insurance or to be taken care of, and that's totally valid. Self-employment is a choice, and there's no reason why you can't also do things as a side hustle. But one of the things that I started learning as I was in my quest to be self-employed and be a full-time artist, that there wasn't really a good guidebook on how to do that. And in school, it was all about concept and, what are you doing? Why are you making this? Let's grind you through the mill in school, right? And then out of school, they're also preening me to teach. If you go through your MFA, unless you're going to a very different type of school or a very high-end school, they're preening you for museums. But in a lot of other situations, they teach you how to teach. And I never wanted to teach. I wanted to own my own business and sell my art, make art that I could have people want, and to have them find that value in it. So, as a result of that, I started reading every single book that I could get my hands on about small business, because there are some out there about how to be an artist and how to live in the world as an artist, but not nearly enough, and not nearly enough that were at the level that I was at the time. So I read how to get a small business for dummies, how to do it all, those Millionaire Next Door books, and like all of them. I read so many books and or listened to them on Audible. But that was certainly part of it. And I feel like there's a lot of really incredible business advice out there that I was able to glean from those books and those experiences, and then learning how to take that information and apply it was really big for me. So in the books about how to have your own small business, in my head I'm thinking, okay, this applies to me in this way, obviously, moving forward on my art career. But Pablo, what was the best business advice you heard?
Or you can.
Yeah, I have one more thought too, to kind of add on to it. So, out of show of hands, who's been in college, graduated college, like most of y'all have taken some class or course, even high school, this is probably, one of the things that I think helped me out was, so in order to kind of pursue my side hustle, so I worked, regular jobs, retail, overnights, I did a lot of things. I actually dropped out of college a few times, so I'm not a college graduate, so it's kind of, you don't need that degree to succeed. But one of the things that I did take from schooling was kind of the class schedule, I guess. So essentially I would work a 9 to 5, and what I did was I set hour-and-a-half blocks after work where I would study something for an hour and a half. So I'd leave work, and then I would do nothing but watch videos on YouTube about photography and learning about aperture and ISO settings. And then an hour and a half was up, I'd take a break, and then I'd go back, and I was learning about copywriting, blog writing, like why do people read what they read? Why do people go where they go? And so I did this pretty consistently for a few years. And I think if you're going to take your craft seriously, you should kind of treat it the same way. Find a designated amount of time and something that you love or you're passionate about that you won't get tired of, and just commit to doing that every day. If you go to the bookstore, quite literally, if you go there from week to week, it's very different. So we do a lot, but I think a lot of that's because we do consistent things, small consistent things every day. So in one day you may not notice anything, but if you don't go in for a week, there's something a little different. If you don't go in for a month, there's something drastically different. So finding that time to set aside, to dedicate to your craft, I think is very important. This question.
Oh,
yeah, that, so I read all those books because I was working in a gallery and I asked the owner, should I get a business degree in addition to the art degree? And he said, no, read every single book you can about business, so do that. And then, so yeah, so that was great advice, but I was wondering what the best advice you were ever given in pertaining to finance or business.
That patience. So I wouldn't say this is anything that came from any one person. It's just something that kind of has come up from reading a lot of autobiographies. A lot of people have been successful in their field, and it's that you have to have patience. So the reptile store, I had been working on that, maybe not knowingly so, but I had started breeding when I was a kid. I started breeding reptiles as a kid. I started selling as a teenager in high school, these crickets and mice and lizards, and you consider middle school and high school, right, there's 5 or 6 years, and then also worked for an animal store for another 7 years. And then that's finally when I decided, okay, I'm going to take the leap and try to do it on my own. So from the outside looking in, it looks like, oh, you start a reptile business, you expand it every year, like that's very quick success. But in reality, what it is a lifetime of doing these things that added up to that moment. Have you all heard the story of Picasso at a bar that sells his painting for $50,000? Yeah. So this is one of my favorite stories. So the story is Pablo Picasso sitting at a bar, and a guy sits next to him. He's like, hey, you're Pablo Picasso. He's like, yeah. He's like, he slides over a napkin. He's like, can you do a doodle on this napkin for me? And Pablo Picasso's like, sure. So he takes a napkin, he doodles for literally 10-15 seconds, and he slides it over. He's like, that'll be $15,000. And he has like, $15,000. Like, that took you 10 seconds. It's like, right, it took me 10 seconds, but it took me a lifetime to be able to do that in 10 seconds. So patience. Patience, I think, is the most important things. Yeah.
Pablo Picasso also paid by check because he thought that people wouldn't cash them because his signature was worth more than the check. He was Picasso. So yeah, that's really good advice because it's really true. Patience is everything, and part of that is tempering expectations along the way. Because I've taught adjuncted for years, have a full-time gig for a year, worked at an arts nonprofit for a year and a half. All of those things took away from my entrepreneur career, but it also made me realize what I didn't want to do. I was so miserable in all of those things, and it's really nice when you're able to sort of see out the patience. But we all do things for different reasons, and priorities are huge. I think that's where, like you were saying before, you might see somebody pull up in a nice fancy car, but you don't know if that person is in debt 5 figures because of that car. Like, there's just no way to know. So doing the things that are right for you and prioritize those things, there's a million excuses we can all make, but when it comes down to it, yes, there's privilege out there and getting lucky and all the things, but there are ways to make those dreams come true. And part of that is continuing to talk with people about how to do it. And I think we were talking earlier this week, and Pablo had some really good advice on who you surround yourself with as well. And I think that's really also key, because you need cheerleaders, but you also need people who are going to challenge you and build your toolbox of people. So if I have friends that after an art show will lay down all the numbers and be like, my Saturday was like this, how was your Saturday, well I did this, blah, blah, blah. And then I have other friends who I have through grad school and beyond. And when I need help conceptually with my work, they are on it, and they are not kind. They are breaking it down. So now is the time. If you guys have specific questions about money or finances or specific to art or any other genre, we'll do our best to answer them. We can come around. Yeah.
Can you recommend tax-deferred investments versus how you would pay taxes on your investments when you're self-employed?
I need to preface this with I am not a financial advisor. So all I can tell you is that if you're doing it through proper channels, like if you have any one of those JP Morgan Chase, Charles Schwab, Vanguard, Fidelity, if you're investing through a company and you're putting money in and or withdrawing it, the 1098,
Right.
you get a 1098 in a dividend form, or if you have dividends, you get all of that at the end of the year. And it's pretty self-explanatory if you hand that over to your accountant, or if you don't have an accountant, if your taxes are simple enough that you don't need an accountant, awesome. But because there is a line on your taxes for where that goes. And it should be pretty clear on the sheet that the IRS or the company will give you as your tax form. But if you're investing in a Roth IRA, it is taxed on your income now versus if you put it in a traditional IRA, that money is tax deferred and you will get taxed on it when you take it out over age whatever, and that will vary on if you take it out pre-62 versus after or something like that. I haven't quite reached that point yet, but we'll be able to tell you more about it. And then if you are really interested in delving in more, there is, like Pablo was saying earlier, like his experience is basically the KISS method, which is keep it simple, stupid, for as long as you can, and then get more complicated. Because really, depends on how much money you make, that, if you're not making much more than 10, 20,000 a year on your art, the IRS isn't going to care that much, and you probably are going to be able to keep it together on a Schedule C form pretty easily. Versus once you get over that hump, you got a lot more expenses, you might be paying rent, all of that kicks into high gear, and you might benefit more from looking into a different structure than an LLC, like an S Corp or other corporate structure. But if you have an LLC or self-employed, it's about 25% of your income that is going to be taxed, and it sucks. Whatever. We got nice streets.
Can you guys also talk about record keeping, the importance of record keeping, and what you can deduct and what you can't?
I'm going to toss that to spreadsheets.
I have an accountant that does, but I do keep track of everything, kind of my own way. And weirdly enough, I always track my stuff outside of the accountants. That way we can kind of compare and contrast, make sure things are perfectly correct. One of the things that I did want to add on, especially for new creatives or for side hustles, is this kind of helped me. I tend to just kind of jump into things and then figure it out along the way. So when I was doing like pop-up events for the bookstore, the reptile store, going to different shows and selling things, I set up as an LLC, but making sure that I deposited everything and tracked everything was helpful for me in the sense that in order to pull any of that money out, I had to have pretty much a solid reason to know exactly why I was pulling it out. So there's always the temptation of buying things or treating yourself, but when it's fully in your business account, you have to, say specifically what it's going towards. And for me, that was kind of, weirdly enough, kind of a saving thing. So I'm like, well, I can pay myself or I can reinvest in this. I can pay myself and we can go get lunch, or I can use that to invest in this new lens for my camera. I can, I don't know if that's relatable to anybody, but keeping track of things allows me to not spend money. I don't know if that's everyone, but it's been helpful.
Yeah, and I just follow with, I also do monthly accounting, and when you file your taxes on the Schedule C and other forms, and there's everything that you can deduct in categories on there. So it's like your shipping and your supplies and advertising is its own line. And so I have envelopes or a file folder depending on business. And my receipts go directly into each of those categories. And so if you're like, oh, what can I start to write off on my taxes? I worked for a woman who got audited, and I had to go through and do all her receipts. I was like her assistant. She was an artist, actually. We painted houses together, like fancy finishes. But they audited her for 1 year, and then they audited her for the next 5 years previous. And it sucked. But she was writing things off like she'd buy a pair of pants, and then she'd wear them to an opening and write them off on her taxes. That's a no-no. There are lots of things that if they're not very closely related to one of those IRS categories, then you should not be accounting for it in that way. And then doing that monthly or quarterly is the best way to do it, I think. And then if you get into a good rhythm with your business and with taxes, most businesses pay quarterly taxes, and you pay an estimated number based on the previous year. And it takes a lot of the guesswork out. I just had a friend last week who said, you know, she had a couple high years and she's not paying estimated taxes. She like pays based on her last quarter instead of based on that quarter from the last year. And now the IRS is sending her letters saying she needs to pay a lot more. It's really nerve-wracking because then you have to call them and get on the phone for hours. So anyways, once you're past, again, like once you get high enough in that money structure, a lot of this stuff hopefully will start to become a little bit more routine, and giving yourself that time to sit down and do it is also part of our job that no one sees.
Just add to that, so retail, there's a lot of website options. So the bookstore, my reptile store uses Clover, the bookstore uses Shopify. But a lot of the software that's coming out now makes it less daunting. So Shopify, for example, you can put in enough information to where it'll give you what you need to pay at the end of every month or every quarter. That's been super helpful. So and then the more you categorize the products you sell and where you sell it to, like on Shopify, if I sell a book to someone in California, it'll populate that on the back end and say, okay, this is what they paid, this is what you paid to this county, this city, the state. It's super helpful. So just doing the time investment into looking at what you're going to use to sell products can be very beneficial long term too, especially with taxes.
Yeah. Who has that question? Yeah, Kelly.
Can you talk about a pricing model where you're actually making money on, you know, with both supplies and hourly, and how artists, part of me wants to just say, can you tell everyone please do that, but also how you do that and how you run the numbers to make sure you're not just giving away all of your labor and paying back supplies.
Labor that you're paying yourself, the materials, and then a profit margin. That's your money set aside for when things go up, when you have to start paying rent, or whatever it is, because that time will come. And if you're not doing that, then you're really selling yourself short in the end. And everyone can compete on 3 levels: by cost, by experience or customer service, and then by the value of the product. And artists should always be competing in the realm of customer service and the extraordinariness of your product. You should never be competing in cost. That's what Walmart is for. They compete on cost all the time. Do you buy art there? I hope no one uses that.
For me, as far as like pricing stuff creatively and figuring out what that price, I took kind of a direct approach as far as like the blog and like photography. So if you guys ever read a post where it says, you know, top 3 waterfalls in Costa Rica, that's kind of work that I had to go take pictures of the waterfalls and then give you like a day itinerary of what you would do. And the way I figured out my pricing for that kind of thing was, well, first one, someone came to me with an offer. They said, we'll pay you $30, literally $30, for a link to our hotel website. And I still remember that $30 for this thing. It's like, holy crap, somebody paid me for my writing. I mean, granted, it was a link, but still it felt good. And so the next time someone approached me, I threw out a number, I said $50. And then, cool, we'll take 3 links at $50 a piece. I was like, okay, so it's getting better. And over time, it's kind of scaled up. So ultimately, as a creative, I feel like the people looking at your work and who literally give you the money will kind of give you an idea of what it's worth, even though I know myself, I'm like, oh, this is for sure $2,000 a piece. If I can get $2,000, it's not worth $2,000 as much as I'd like it to. So over time, I've kind of gradually increased. So from $30 to $50 to the next jump up was $120 for my work, and then it went to $500. And now I'll make about $2,000 for like a weekend gig, essentially for photography in a one-day thing. So a lot of that has just been saying yes, it's pushing it a little bit further every time. Okay, I got this much this time, maybe I can do better and get more next time. And that kind of helps me set a basis for the value of what I do. So I have friends who make way more than that, doing the exact same thing. I have friends that make a lot less than that, doing the exact same thing. Just kind of, obviously jumping in is kind of my approach, figuring out what is someone going to pay, and then going from there. So just learning repetition over and over, and eventually kind of get a good gauge and estimate. But if you're not making one sale, then you don't have any feedback to go off of. So even if you do, maybe creating something that's not up to your caliber, just something kind of not kind of used to, and just selling that pizza for $50. Just start there and like, cool, $50, I can do better than that next time. And that'll at least get you going in the right direction of getting to what your value is.
Yeah, and I think it is really hard when you're starting off to know your own value, which is why also you should be constantly talking to other people. Because if you don't think your piece is worth $100, nobody else is going to think that or buy it. And you should really ask yourself, like, why don't I value my own work more? Is it because I need to put more time in my craft? Is it because I know I'm not where I should be? Whatever the reason is, there's a reason. And being honest with yourself in that is a really good starting place. Because I definitely had the same experience. Nobody starts, at that super high level, because that's just all ego. You have to like work your way up. But keeping that community, constantly asking people, doing market research, if you have an opportunity to do indie arts or arts picnic or farmer's market, and if all of your $20 items are gone in a minute, then they should have been 40,
Right.
Or you kind of test that level. And that's okay when you're starting out, but again, like if you are also looking at what's around you, and seeing what other artists are charging. Like Pablo was saying, one writer might be charging 3 times the amount that you are, but they're still getting that rate. And that there are people all the time who will say, oh, your work is so affordable. But then you're like, well, why aren't you buying it?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to take in, but definitely doing that pricing research is key. Who else has a question?
I'm curious about the threshold between a side hustle and a growing business. Like, is there a time to transition over to like, okay, I have a bank account for like my product or for whatever I'm trying to make money off of? Because I think, that at the beginning there's a lot of like, okay, this is like all under the table type stuff, where I'm making like $30 here, $50 there. Like at one point, does it change over into a business? You start thinking about turning it into an LLC or, having a specific bank account or a Square account or whatever to process credit cards and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. So for me, the way my approach has been to essentially get all my bases met with whatever I'm doing, whether that was, for me, at one point I was working overnight at Walmart and then working just a retail job during the day. And at that time that's kind of when I was doing the road cricket thing. And we scaled that up enough to, again, it took 3 years, so we didn't pay ourselves anything, not $1 for 3 years straight. And it wasn't until we were making enough monthly that we were each able to at least get all of our bases met for our own expenses. So paying for car, insurance, our home, that kind of thing. And we probably could have waited longer, but after 3 years, you're like getting patient. But we at least made sure we could live off of it. So we set up an LLC right away. I think it's $600 a year or so. At least that's what it used to be before you set up an LLC. So, and also, I don't know if anybody is looking at that part of starting, but you can set up an LLC and get your EIN number like in an hour. So it's really easy to do that. As soon as you do that, you can set up a bank account and start depositing all those sales into a fund, and you can kind of keep track of that. And I always make sure I can take care of myself first before I commit to something else. So with the bookstore, I made sure the reptile store could afford myself, the business partner, my employees, and then I started doing the bookstore as a side hustle. And then now it's getting to the point where the bookstore has employees, I can pay myself a little bit more, so I'm starting to look into what's the next thing. And kind of just keeps going over and over and over again.
Yeah, and if you have like, I don't know if you meant like side hustle to making that your full-time job or more like hobby to side hustle.
I meant like when you're trying to start a business, but it, like as Pablo described, it starts as a side hustle, you know, because you're making money primarily in one place, but you're trying to grow a business on the side.
Yeah. I mean, I think what he said is pretty it. I think I would just add, you can keep things really simple as long as you don't have employees. So if it's just you, you can still register with your like social security number. And then you're just filling out that Schedule C, which has the same write-offs as if you were to have an LLC. The difference with an LLC is that you have to pay for it to get it set up. And you have other protections that come with it. So it might depend more on the type of business and the liability that you have. If you're doing something kind of creative, like if you're selling your art or product, you might not need a ton of those protections right away. And so money-based, like he said, like until you're making like the 10, 20,000, whatever number you put on it to pay for certain things, you can get away with doing things really, really simply for a really long time if it's just you and you're the sole person in charge of your business. Other question? Dana.
What was your favorite business advice book?
Repeat your question.
What was your favorite business advice book? Well, I know you got that guy.
Gary Vaynerchuk, I've read a lot of his stuff. I don't know if you guys watch any of his stuff on YouTube. Gives really fantastic advice that he wrote. It's actually his least sold book. It's called Thank You Economy. So the entire premise of this book is to essentially care for your customers more, I guess more than other businesses do. And one of the examples he uses is he quite literally left his business on a busy day to make sure he could deliver a product that was ordered for a customer that was like hours away. And I hope that I do a decent job of kind of doing the same thing with the bookstore and the reptile store for that matter. I try to make sure we can offer either the best prices or the best service that we can. So I think it goes a long way when you show that you care for your customers, because ultimately without the customers, without your fans, the people who are buying your work, you can't do what you love. And I think that book is a pretty good foundation for kind of explaining and showing that side of things. You know, thanking your customers, going out of your way to make sure they have a pleasant experience or giving them the advice they need, the help they need. The bookstore is a great one for that because you can bring up any topic and I'd be like, oh yeah, I got a book for that. So it's kind of easy with the bookstore, but that's right. That's from the
Yeah, that's a good question because I think for me they're also like segmented in like how to set up a business and then how to run a business. I read one called The Science of Selling, which was really interesting because it gets into people's heads with like why, you know, tags are red. It's because the same reason stoplights are red, right? It catches us. And mirrors, having things aligned, like when there's multiples of things, and then what happens when one of those is missing, and then it tricks us into thinking like, oh, well, that one there's one missing, or there's only one left, so I gotta get that one, versus other people are like, oh, there's only one left, I don't want that one, maybe that was the one nobody wanted. So that was a cool book. And then on investing, I do have that Invested Ed, invest like ed is in education. Which is a really good book if you don't know a lot about investing in the market, like getting into the stock market. That was a really good book. And Phil Town has written a lot of books, but this is by his daughter, who grew up in the house hearing all these terms. And she wrote her own book about being a young person investing, which is pretty good. But I mean, read as many books as you can. and buy them at midnight oil.
Yeah.
I did a little more book. So this one's a little bit newer. This one's called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. So it's his story of how he started Nike, Shoe Dog. And I think I really appreciate this book because of how honest he was about building Nike, which is this behemoth of a business that it is today. And he had kind of a similar story where, so he was an accountant and he like literally slept in the office. He didn't pay himself for, I think it was also the first 3 or 4 years. But by that point, he already had sponsored athletes. He had multiple people on payroll. He didn't pay himself anything because he was working late at night doing accounting for other businesses. So that was a kind of a fun thing to see, is that even these people are at the top kind of start at the same place. You know, we all start here, and then through learning and growing, we kind of get to where we're at now. So seeing Phil Knight, one of the biggest, businesses of all time, business owners, not paying himself and doing the same grind over and over and over, year after year. That's good read. Any other questions? We have a couple minutes left. Yes.
This might be kind of a depressing question, but I don't know, I've been thinking about recently, like I'm getting into tattooing, and it's very much like a luxury item. Like I think a lot of, especially finer, for like luxury items that like most people maybe can't afford. And especially like reflecting on the pandemic, like, is there a way to prepare yourself for a reality where your product is not needed or like wanted? And I know it's even late, you guys kind of touched on like kind of making the money before you're investing, but I'm kind of curious if like, is there, I don't know, like a backup plan, or do you make things for, I don't know, the high-end clients and the low-end clients, like, how do you balance that?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things, so I got lucky with the reptile business. So for every reptile that I sell, I now have a customer that has to come back to feed their pet every single week, if not every couple of days. So the reptile business during the pandemic actually thrived because we were stuck inside, and what do? I sell indoor pets. So I got lucky in that sense. And honestly, the bookstore is kind of nerve-wracking in the sense that if you don't have extra spending money, you don't need to buy that book, or you have libraries which give out books for free. So like books aren't needed, which makes me nervous. So I've been trying to figure out ways to kind of figure out how to find a safety net. And one of those, we're investing heavy into YouTube and video and kind of creating like AdSense revenues, kind of the best way to put it. One of the things I would consider as far as like tattooing, and this is something I've observed over the past few years, is that a lot of people now more than ever, especially students, still live with their parents or have multiple roommates. It's near impossible to kind of get your own place. For that reason, it's kind of interesting because you have this demographic of people from late teens to mid to late 20s that are sharing living spaces and now actually have a larger budget for things like tattoos and stickers and books, which is really not something I expected. So because a lot of people don't have this overhead expense for mortgage and all this other stuff, adult things, they're able to support artists that are, doing tattoos or ceramics, and there's a lot of support in that space, I feel. So the more skilled you become, the more valuable you become too, especially with tattooing. I don't know how many people go to one person no matter what, even if they have to wait or if they have to travel. So just getting good at what you do, whatever it is, I think will be super helpful. And then also, if you are a tattoo artist, you can document the process if you're good with social media, and then try to figure out ways to get people to buy a book of your designs of the best of the best. Or there's a lot of offshoots as far as creating that you can sell.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because I have to remind myself that everybody has a budget, and we all have a set amount that we are willing to spend on whatever X item is. For me, I don't spend more than $5 on a t-shirt unless an artist makes. So, right, we all have our idea of what it is. So I have to remind myself that there are artists out there that are actively selling their work for tens of thousands of dollars, and everybody has a budget, and you can't ever really judge what that budget is going to be. And it also goes back to those priorities. If it's your priority to, drive a Bentley and get a really nice tattoo, then that's all you. But there are people who also are going to spend money on art because it's something that they value, and that's people spend money on art to support artists and the arts. And I think that's something that, even though this culture, we monetize everything, and it is really scary getting out of college and trying to even think about being an artist, when there are things like, you know, being a tattoo artist where you're getting that constant cash flow. But even then, like, you know, what's your cap on that career? And how many other things could you do in addition to that to reach like those next levels? And there's some amazing tattoo artists out there. There's also some amazing graffiti artists out there who also are now showing their work in major museums because the culture has caught on that their work is valuable. So I think whatever it is that you do, you know, we put the money on it of, well, how much can I make? But also know that if you're making quality and if you're putting yourself as an artist, especially, into what you're doing, and, you know, the true message of art, bearing your soul to humanity, then people are going to find value in that. And that's also with the comment before, like, if I don't think it's worth money, nobody else is. But if I think it's worth thousands of dollars, someone else is also going to think that. And then the right person comes along. But there's also the Steve Martin conundrum where he said, you know, I could fill an amphitheater with 1 million people and they each pay $1. But I gotta find the 1 million people. Or I can wait for that one person to pay me $1 million for a concert. And that's in a lot of ways like what artists are doing. But as a creative, you're also figuring out those pricing schemes where you have your low, your mid, and your high range. And if you can make money off of the stickers and then do your tattooing, and then also have like a line of fine art, the chance of you selling one of those fine art pieces for thousands of dollars to someone who's bought your stickers and then gotten your tattoos is highly probable. And whether or not you're tattooing, like if you're an artist, you should also be sort of having those tiers of pricing. And as you put yourself out there, none of this happens in a vacuum. None of this happens if you never get out of your studio or your basement or whatever. But if you're putting yourself out there in the art world, those people are going to find you. And if they're not buying your work, that's when you start asking those questions of, well, what do I need to change? Do I need to hone my craft? Do I need to work more with a different concept, etc.? So that would be what I'd say. A couple more questions. One more question if anybody has it, and then we'll let you guys mingle.